children with various disabilities, to make sure that those children are brought to the fore and are given opportunity to access education. We know in some cultures in this country that when people have children with disability, there's a tendency to hide those children, and probably that is also what would contribute to them not being counted during the census. But we want to urge Kenyans of all walks of life that having a child with disability does not mean that that child cannot make any meaningful contribution to this country. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, having been a governor in Uasin Gishu County, we were able to recruit over 100 persons with disability. And I can tell you, amongst the best public servants we had are persons with disability. Mr. Speaker, if you visited the county government of Uasin Gishu in the executive, all our executive officers were being cleaned by deaf people. And I can tell you they were very effective and very efficient. As a nation, we need to properly plan for people with disability. And I want to reiterate here, Mr. Speaker, that there is need for compliance to the laws that have already been provided for. For example, Mr. Speaker, if you go to all government offices, accessibility to those offices are still a challenge. You therefore don't expect them to be able to seek services like other citizens with ease, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this statement, and the committee should further probe on other funds that has been set aside for persons with disability, particularly funds that go through the offices program, Mr. Speaker, because sometimes they don't end up in the intended recipients. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this statement. Thank you.
The last one from Senator Mwalumba Jones Mwashushe. Senator Mwaruma.
There's a problem. Okay. Yeah. Nashukuru Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kunipa hii fursa ili kuchangia taarifa ambayo imeletwa na seneta mteule, Seneta Asige, kuhusu mambo ya watu wanaoishi na ulemavu. Katika taarifa yake amesema ya kwamba hakuna takwimu za kutosha za watu wanaoishi na ulemavu. Na vile wasemaji wamesema, waliotangulia kusema, wamesema kwamba bila takwimu ama data hatuwezi panga mambo ya walemavu. Na kusema ule kweli, Mheshimiwa Spika, Kenya tuko na shida ya kuangazia mambo ya watu wanaoishi na ulemavu. Leo tulikuwa katika kamati ya elimu tukitunga sheria ya disability bill, na tulikuwa tunahusisha wadau katika ile sheria, na tulipata mambo ya kushangaza sana ya kwamba kuna wanafunzi wengi ama wafanyikazi wengi katika mashule ambao hawajalipwa mishahara kwa miezi 9, 10 na zaidi. Mheshimiwa Spika, katika shule za wanaoishi na ulemavu zinahitaji walimu, lakini kando na walimu, Mheshimiwa Spika, wale wanahitajika ni wale caregivers ama watu ambao wataangalia wale watoto. Wengine wanahitaji kuoshwa, wengine wanahitaji kusukumwa sehemu moja hadi nyingine. Kwa hivyo tutaangalia hii taarifa kwa undani, na naomba kamati ya Labor na Social Welfare iangalie kwa undani, kwa sababu wakati wa bunge la 12 tulisukuma sana ile Ministry ya Labor na Social Welfare ipate kupata takwimu za kutosha na kuandikisha wale wote wanaoishi na ulemavu na kuhakikisha ya kwamba wameenda shuleni. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, nashukuru sana Senator Asige, na anafanya kazi nzuri ya kupigania wale wanaoishi na ulemavu Kenya. Tutangojea hiyo ripoti ambayo itakuja kutoka kwa hiyo kamati, na najua mambo ya walemavu yatazidi, lakini hasa katika kila kaunti tupate takwimu ama data ya kutosha ya wale ambao wanaishi na ulemavu, na zile pesa ambazo wanahitaji kupata kama kwa inua jamii wote wawe wanaweza kupata. Kwa hivyo nashukuru Mheshimiwa Asige, na asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa hiyo nafasi.
Senator Sigei, 2 minutes, kindly.
Thank you. Honorable Speaker, for this opportunity. I would like to also add my voice to the statement by the Honorable Senator Asige. Mr. Speaker, when we speak about the inaccuracy of the data about persons living with disability in this country, it is not only a matter of subject which speaks into the Social and Labor Committee. Mr. Speaker, the latest census that we had in this country has got a percentage of 2.2% of people living with disability. That translates to 0.9 million people. Failure to have an accurate data in itself, Mr. Speaker, affects the inability of the government of the day and any other government institution, whether at the county level or at the national level, to mainstream and operationalize the demands that persons living with disability are required. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, there is the Global Summit where the government of Kenya undertook to implement and mainstream services, rights, and entitlements to persons with disability. And it is going to be very unfortunate because there is no way we can implement those commitments if we do not have the appropriate and accurate data on persons living with disability. I want to appreciate my colleague, Sister Senator Asige, for taking it up and also championing the rights of people living with disability. And in this case, I want to encourage the Labor Committee, whose responsibility this statement has been given, to ensure that it goes beyond just getting the data, but also going to confirm that that data is a representation of the people from the youngest to the person who is in their sunset years and they are disabled and they need the support of the government of the day. Mr. Speaker, I support and I thank the Honorable Senator Sige for the bold step that she took. Thank you.
Honorable Senators, the time allocated for statements is over. Actually, you are hinting into the other businesses time. So I kindly request the two senators who have put their requests maybe to take 1 minute each kindly. Senator Onyonka.
I would like to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the minute to speak. I am actually humbled to listen to what my brother Counsel and Madam Asige have raised about this matter. And I would like to raise this issue with the Labor Committee in this Senate to make sure that when they begin to pick views and they're beginning to engage, they involve as many of us as possible, because many of our counties, Mr. Speaker, don't have any data, information, and anything to do with people with disability until when the campaigns come. That's when we just call them and meet them around. I think we need to be more serious and let us take these challenges very deeply because they're affecting our people. Thank you, Madam Asige, for being a very good example of somebody who's been nominated to represent that community. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Professor Kamal Jepkoech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me the 1 or 2 minutes to add my voice to the statement that was raised by Senator Asike. I want to thank her for doing this. Mr. Speaker, it is true that data doesn't seem to be correct. Not just the data of the people with disabilities, but even children with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, there has to be a way in which we can know our children from when they're young. And as the committee looks at that, let them also look at our schools, because some schools register children one term, the next term they have new children, they don't have other children. I think this question is very important because it's going to open our minds on which solutions we should really be dealing with, or how we are going to approach this. Because we also know, Mr. Speaker, that the issue of disability has been associated with witchcraft and has been associated with so many other things. The side that people are embarrassed, some children are being locked in rooms, some children are being closed. So looking for data is going to be a very challenging thing, but we want to look for ways in which we can get to know who actually our disabled children are, people are. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we need to actually ask ourselves, is this the responsibility of a mother who gave birth to a disabled child, or it should be the responsibility of a nation that receives tax? We need to see how we can move that burden away from the parents, because, Mr. Speaker, you realize that if you have 4 children and one of them is disabled, you'll spend 50% of your time with the disabled child and 50% for the other 3 children, which means there are many challenges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All the statements start committing to the relevant committees, standing committees of this House. Honorable Senators, in the public gallery, we have 97 students accompanied by 6 teachers from Mununga High School in Nakuru County who are in the Senate on an education tour. Honorable Senators, in our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. Thank you. Next order.
Order number 8, the Natural Resources Benefit Sharing Bill, Senate Bills number 6 of 2022, second reading division.
Yeah, the delegations are not enough. We don't have enough numbers to get this vote. So we defer that business. Then we go to the next one.
Order number 9, the County Vocational Education and Training Bill, Senate Bills number 3 of 2022, second reading.
Honorable Senators, we concluded debate on this motion, and now I call upon the mover to reply. Senator Kajwang, Moses.
Mr. Speaker,
And Senator, okay, you should know when to raise point of order. I think the Speaker, Right Honorable Amason Kingi, has given very clear directions on when to raise a point of order. A point of order is raised when another member is contributing to anything, not just any time you raise point of order. What is which chair standing order and what is out of order?
Speaker, I respect your guidance, but a point of order can be raised any time. Sometimes, even on the matter that I want to raise point of order on, Mr. Speaker,
Under which standing order?
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I was instructed by your chair.
By my chair?
Yes, by the chair, by the Speaker, that today, at the beginning of the business of this House, I was supposed to present evidence on the motion that I brought yesterday in this House with regards to the issue of national security in the country. And it is in our standing orders that for whichever names that a member of this House brings in any motion, there ought to be substantiated. And Mr. Speaker, that I thought would have been, when I didn't get any direction from your chair, I thought for the purposes of this House as a House of Record, it would be important for me.
Let us give Senator Kajwang time to reply. Then I'll give you some time to substantiate the issues that I am directing. There are some issues that you want to be substantiated.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kajwang, let us conclude with this motion first.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to reply, having moved the motion on the bill for the county vocational education and training, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all my colleagues who have contributed to debate on this bill, from the leader of majority, who employed his institutional memory as a ranking member of the Finance Committee to tell the House the origins of this bill that we started processing in the last Parliament but was not successful, and so we decided to revive it in this House. Mr. Speaker, the leader of majority cited the conditional allocation of 40 million per county that this House has appropriated for a period of 3 years. And we had realized that counties were receiving that money, and yet we didn't have a very good framework that would separate village polytechnics and homecraft centers from the purview of the TVET authority. Mr. Speaker, several other members contributed to the debate on the bill. Senator Mungatana brought the attention of the mover to certain litigation that has been ongoing with regards to employees of these village polytechnics and vocational centers, some of whom are still in the payroll of the national government. And Mr. Speaker, that was a very good observation, because we must ensure that as we devolve this function fully, we must also look at the human resource, and we must also look at the financial resources. Mr. Speaker, Senator Ledamo Lekina talked about the recognition of prior learning, and that this bill must attempt to entrench that in law. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that the National Qualifications Authority, together with the TVET Authority, already are in conversation to ensure that prior learning can be recognized, so that that Otieno, who is a very talented panel beater somewhere in California, in Nairobi, can be formalized. Mr. Speaker, I believe those who are talking about hustlers and those who really believed in the agenda of hustlers would be happy if we can bring these people into the formal economy. And that can be done through recognition of prior learning, so that our experienced and our expert painters, experienced and expert mechanics, experienced and expert masons who do not have any certification can be recognized on their prior experience, and that can now allow them to tap into jobs in county governments and jobs in the formal sector. Mr. Speaker, there were a lot of observations. The Senator for Kiambu advised that we should not over-legislate for small businesses. Mr. Speaker, this legislation is to guide the establishment of vocational centers by county governments. There is still going to be space for private sector players. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to vocational training, the private sector has played a very, very important role. It is not the intention of this bill to regulate every college or every apprentice operation or every training operation around the corner, or every those that are private. Mr. Speaker, more than 10 senators spoke to this bill, and I want to commit to the House that I will look at the Hansard very, very carefully. I will also look at the report of the Education Committee very carefully, and once again, I want to thank members of the Education Committee. They've done an excellent job. They have already drafted proposed amendments, and Mr. Speaker, I agree largely with most of those amendments. I also agree with many of the submissions that were made by members on the floor of this House. We will very, very quickly ensure that the necessary amendments are processed and that this bill can leave this House. And Mr. Speaker, I know Senator Mungatana has beaten me to the position of having his bill being the first being processed by the Senate. It doesn't matter. His bill is extremely important. This is extremely important. We should be seen to be sending legislation to the National Assembly, legislation that goes beyond those that are prescribed in the Constitution, like DORA and CARA. And I want to encourage my colleagues with private members' bills also to follow suit, so that we can flood the inbox of the National Assembly with legislation that is meant to make devolution work. Mr. Speaker, I beg to reply, and pursuant to Standing Order 66.3, I beg that the putting of the question be deferred to a later date. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you. Permission granted. So we go to the next order.
No, Senator Okech, where is he now to prosecute his matter?
Senator Okech, you have the floor.
Thank you once again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I did bring a motion on under Standing Order number 37 on a matter of national importance, namely the deteriorating security situation in the country. And as I was moving my motion, Mr. Speaker, the Senator for Kakamega, Senator Boni Alwale, did question my evidence on a statement that I made in this House that some pronounced leaders of this country did make statements or pronouncements that was tantamount to inciting the public to the attacks that we saw in private property of President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta and to the Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga's property called Spectre. And Mr. Speaker, the chair did direct that I substitute that statement, for which the chair did ask that today I bring evidence to the same effect. Mr. Speaker, I'm on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, the Evidence Act does require under Section 8 that if I'm in a court of law, then I provide an affidavit to the same. But in the spirit also of this House, I want to recognize that social media statements, videos that are journalistic, as well as any publication that is journalistic, amounts to evidence. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to table here an order from Office of the Director.
Allow him to table so that also
you respond what I've tabled. You don't just make noise.
If there are substance from the.
I am telling you what I'm tabling, my friend.
What is
Mr. Speaker, I'm on a point of order, Mr. Speaker. I haven't tabled anything. What is responding
Just resume your seat, Senator
It's
Okech.
becoming cantankerous.
Senator Okech, resume your seat.
I'm
to get
lecturing you because you are ignorant.
The point of order. Senator Okech, Senator Boni Karware, Senator Okech, both of you should be honoring in this House. Please, Senator Okech.
Mr. Speaker, I rose on a point of order to draw your attention to the fact of the requirements of Standing Order number 105, responsibility for a statement of fact. That's a standing order upon which Eddie was challenged. So far, Senator Eddie has spent 5 minutes, almost close to 10, explaining absolutely nothing, Mr. Speaker. If you read the provisions of Standing Order number 105, there is no justification or there is no requirement upon the senator to give an explanation of anything. All Senator Eddie needs to do, Mr. Speaker, and you need to read 105 too, is to say, Mr. Speaker, I hereby table the evidence, lack of which he is supposed to withdraw. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want you to guide this House properly, and it is important for the House to remember, because, Mr. Speaker, you didn't guide that yesterday, the words of Senator Eddie Okech, Mr. Speaker, were that Mr. Rigathi Gachagua, together with Kimani Ichung'wah, who is a majority leader in the National Assembly, as well as Moses Kuria, who is a cabinet secretary, convened and made public pronouncements leading to these problems. They made public pronouncement to the extent then he was interrupted by a point of order. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, reading Standing Order number 105-2, can you guide that Senator Eddie Okech without telling us long stories that are not useful at this point? Can he table the evidence before us, Mr. Speaker?
Majority leader, actually,
That is what I was requesting him to do, to table the evidence. Then we assess whether your evidence is admissible. So that if it is not, you go ahead to withdraw, or you go to look for evidence and give you more time.
Mr. Speaker, I have watched my friend Senator Arun Cheriot here tabling things, and he explains what the things is tabling, Mr. Speaker. I am tabling, and I'm explaining what I'm tabling.
Can you table your evidence?
I talked about 3 issues that you cannot gag me just to table them without telling you what I'm tabling, Mr. Speaker.
Now,
okay?
Proceed and table the evidence.
Yeah, so I have to tell you what I'm tabling, my friend. Yeah, so, Mr. Speaker, the first evidence that I'm tabling, both in hard copy here, as well as in a flash disk of videos, Mr. Speaker, are pronouncements by Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah on 18th March 2023 at Kianyanga in Kirinyaga County. And I am also tabling here the pronouncement by Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, stated that the government is a private company where, I mean, a number of them here on the 18th of February 2023 in Kericho County. And Mr. Speaker, I'm also tabling here statements by Honorable C.S. Moses Kuria on his Twitter handles, and there are a number of them, because I don't want to get majority whip worked up, because I think this evidence are actually bothering him. And because I said a number of leaders, Mr. Speaker, I'm also tabling here Honorable Dismas Baraza's statement on the same that led to this kind of attacks. And in all these statements, Mr. Speaker, I've also come there with the videos here that are also put on this statement. So if it pleases you, I'll table it, Mr. Speaker.
Table the evidence.
And the Bonnie, don't be worked up.
So
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
as we scrutinize your evidence, we continue with the business of the day. No, wait. Next order. I'll see you next time. I'll see you next time. No, at this point you cannot raise a point of order, kindly, Senator Meadow. Next order.
Order number 10, motion, amendment of the Senate calendar for the second session.
Majority Leader, this is your motion. Amendment of the Senate calendar. It's like your mind was moved by the previous contributor was on the floor.
Mr. Speaker, this is a motion that, notwithstanding the resolution of the Senate on the approval of the Senate calendar made on 16 February 2023, and noting the resolutions of the Senate made on Thursday, 23rd of March 2023, on the 5th report of the Procedure and Rules Committee on the amendments to the standing orders of the Senate, and pursuant to Standing Order number 32-4, the Senate resolves to amend its calendar, regular sessions of the Senate of the second session 2023 to provide for morning sittings on Wednesday, pursuant to Standing Order number 34. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is not the first time that the Senate will be sitting on Wednesday mornings. You will recall, Mr. Speaker, that previously we've had sessions where on Wednesday morning
the Senate met and transacted business. But over the course of time, when it became clearly evident, Mr. Speaker, that members were more keen on being before committees in the morning hours of Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and sometimes even Fridays, then as a House we did resolve, Mr. Speaker, to have our sittings just be on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 2:30 to 6:30, unless the House is otherwise moved, Mr. Speaker. But since this House has now adopted, Mr. Speaker, the provisions of the standing order in agreement to what our Procedures and Rules Committee proposed before the House to provide for cabinet secretaries to appear before this House, Mr. Speaker, we want to propose additional time for the Senate to meet so that we do not interrupt the Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays 2:30 that is mostly otherwise filled up, Mr. Speaker, either considering motions on various issues that are topical to the country or statements that are being brought by members, Mr. Speaker, or bills, such as the bills that we want to consider this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, it is in good order that I requested the SPC, and they agreed with us, that we move this motion to allow that the Senate does meet every Wednesday, and the questions as provided for in the motion that we moved here, Mr. Speaker, to provide for different cabinet secretaries to be notified way advance of time, the questions that they shall be asked, so that members can show up in this House, Mr. Speaker, and we agree, depending on how the first 2 or 3 sessions will go, the length of time that you're going to spend, Mr. Speaker. These are things that we said that once we begin on the exercise, and depending on the interest of members and the questions and the issues that are arising from the constituents that we represent in this House, Mr. Speaker, we shall be able to determine how many, for example, cabinet secretaries we can have in a single Wednesday afternoon, and depending on the issues that have been brought before us. Mr. Speaker, therefore, this is a fairly straightforward matter. I do not see why anybody, Mr. Speaker, for whatever reason, will have a problem with it. But of course, I do not want to preempt debate. I want to leave it to the wisdom of the House to either agree with us, either as proposed or together with an amendment, Mr. Speaker, so that this House can meet on Wednesday mornings and consider, Mr. Speaker, that there is business that is actually long-standing and pending. Part of what we could do, Mr. Speaker, and we will be suggesting this to the Senate Business Committee, is that if you look through our order paper, Mr. Speaker, this afternoon, there are almost 10 to 20 motions that have been proposed by various colleagues, which, because of the nature of how we transact business in this House, unfortunately, we have not been able to consider them. Some of these motions have been on the order paper for almost 3 or 4 months, and it's not right, Mr. Speaker. Part of what we could do on those mornings of Wednesday, Mr. Speaker, if you find that we have met and we have concluded on the business and members are satisfied that the business that had been slated earlier, our Cabinet Secretary has responded sufficiently, or asked for additional time, Mr. Speaker, to find better answers to bring before the House, we could as well consider other long-standing businesses that are before the order paper, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't have this practice where colleagues are proposing motions. I don't believe it is out of idleness, Mr. Speaker, or just for want of to fill up the order paper that colleagues propose motions before us. Therefore, it's unfair that we have kept some of these motions on the order paper for more than a month or 2, Mr. Speaker. So giving the Senate additional time to meet means actually we shall be able to transact more that by cabinet secretaries appearing before this House, Mr. Speaker, in a gathering of the plenary, that they are not required to appear before the committees as expected by Article 153 of our Constitution. I appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that yesterday you gave clear guidelines that cabinet ministers will still appear before our committees of Parliament, the committees of Senate, Mr. Speaker, to respond to other ordinary business that was pending or that will arise in the course of members of the various committees going about their duties, Mr. Speaker. That lays to rest that particular matter. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, given that this is a fairly straightforward matter, I do not intend to be long about it because I believe it's something that colleagues can read, understand, and appreciate it. With those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move and request that the Senator for Kakamega, the Dr. Boni Halwale, to second. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Boni Karwale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to second motion. This motion has moved. Mr. Speaker, it was Michael Kijana Wamalwa, the late Vice President of the Republic of Kenya, who, while speaking from this dispatch box, said in politics, if it is possible, it's always good to let a good idea yield to a better idea. It is true, our old calendar has served us very well. It's been a good idea. But if we can allow it to yield to the new calendar as proposed by the leader of the majority, Mr. Speaker, it will be a better idea. Why? Only time is going to prove us right. Honorable members, in the good old days, when we were in the National Assembly, we had a session reserved for questions. And when we opened up Parliament to public transmission of proceedings, that became the most watched part of the proceedings of this House. I therefore want to confirm that Wednesday mornings will be the most popular day in the calendar of this House every week. And Senator Onyonga was there. He remembers when he was Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, and I was Assistant Minister in charge of the East African community. And by the way, Assistant Ministers of Mwai Kibaki were actually deputy ministers. I support this motion. I second this motion, and I want to appeal to members that there is so much value in one raising a question on gold mining in Kakamega directly to the minister in charge, and him not only responding, but opening an avenue for the senator of Migori, for example, to then ask a supplementary question about mining in Migori. This is the point. This is the point. And Mr. Speaker, because we want to ask for more and get more, the saying goes, to those who more is given, more is expected of them. And therefore, members, I want to appeal that again, the usual headache of quorum when we open session, let it not remove the wind from our sails. We should try and be here. And when I look, most of the members in this House, what is the median age here? The median age here could be around 41, 40, 41? Yeah, very young people. Why would you still be in bed at that time? I remember in the other parliament, when the senator of Meru was arguing his case, he used to say he starts functioning best at around 1 o'clock.
Senator and
The former senator of Meru.
Senator Mudhamia, who was in 1963.
No, I mean
Senator
the second senator.
And Senator Midega
Great.
Linturi.
Yes, great.
Which
He
one?
used-
Which
he used to-
senator?
Kiraitu-
For the purpose of record, because I did
Yeah,
not
yeah,
hear his
I'm very specific and factual.
Kiraitu Murungi.
It was Senator Kiraitu Murungi
Okay.
who used to amuse us from this House that he starts functioning best at around 1 o'clock. So we don't have that problem anymore. Even me, who has more years than most of you, I am in the element of a bullfighter. Bullfighters, we start feeding our bulls at 4 a.m. in the morning. And after I finish feeding the bulls, I normally support my workers in milking my cows. I have got my favorite cow, it is called a tambo. A tambo likes it when I'm milking myself. So we are people who wake up early. Amita, you are killing me with your laughter. So, Mr. Speaker, sir. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, with those many words, I want to second that this motion becomes, sees the day of the light. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Honorable Senators, I propose a question that notwithstanding the resolution of the Senate on the approved the Senate calendar amended on 16th February 2023, and noting the resolution of the Senate made on Thursday 23rd March 2023 on the fifth report of the Procedures and Rules Committee on the amendments of the standing orders of the Senate, and pursuant to standing order that 2.4, the Senate resolves to amend its calendar regular sessions of the Senate for the second session 2023 to provide for morning sittings on Wednesdays pursuant to standing order that 4. Senator Kibwana Ali Aminda, continue amusing the majority whip.
Asante Bwana Spika. No, na mimi nataka kuunga mkono tu upande majority leader akisema kuwa tunafaa kuendelea kufanya kazi. Kusema kweli, sisi wengine ni watu wa mkono, ni technical people na si watu wa siasa sana. Kwa hivyo tungetaka kweli motions nyingi ziko. Kama Bwana Speaker, kuanzia wiki moja imepita, niko na statement yangu na niko na motion na mpaka sasa haijafika. Nimeona vitu vingi kweli havijakuwa sawa. Kuna motion kama ya dada yetu Senator Gloria, na kusema kweli hii motion ni kitu ya maana sana ya wasichana wetu kuwa na hii mambo ya sanitary towels. Nimeona motion nyingine ya Senator Kavindu, mambo ya 1998 bombing compensation. Kwa hivyo naona kusema kweli kuna mambo mengi sana yamekaa na yamechelewa sana kwa sisi kuendelea na kazi zetu. Kwa hivyo hapo nitamunga Bwana majority leader mkono kwa hii kazi tu, kusema kweli iweze kuendelea. Asante Bwana Speaker.
Asante sana. Sasa tumsikize Seneta wa Baringo, Kipkorir William Cheptumo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion. Mr. Speaker, this motion is fairly straightforward, actually. We've amended our standing orders already. And what we are doing is to facilitate the implementation of that amendment. Mr. Speaker, if you look at Article 97 of the Constitution, this House is to represent the counties and serve to protect the interests of the counties and their governments. Mr. Speaker, I agree we do so through the statements, but I think, Mr. Speaker, motions and the bills are equally critical in us as a House serving our counties. Mr. Speaker, I have two motions. I think they are before you for approval. And already one member has already spoken about another one. Shortly, Mr. Speaker, our order paper will be full of so many motions, and we are unable to deal with them, Mr. Speaker. So I support this, so that, Mr. Speaker, we are able to deal with these motions because we'll have more time. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the issue of the cabinet secretaries appearing before this House is something that I cherish. Mr. Speaker, when I was supporting the amendment of our standing orders, I gave a practical example of what used to happen in the 10th Parliament when ministers used to appear before the plenary. And Mr. Speaker, this is important because these members will have a direct conversation on behalf of our people with the cabinet ministers. And Mr. Speaker, this will be one of the very exciting moments. I recall that time, Bonnie Kalwale, as I recall, we were together with him when he was Assistant Minister for Health, if I'm not wrong. I was deputizing the Minister for Justice. Mungatana, I think, was Deputy Minister in some ministry. And Mr. Speaker, I want just to tell my colleagues, you will see how exciting that moment will be, because it will be direct conversation with the ministers. And during that time, Mr. Speaker, I remember I helped a lot of colleagues in establishing courts in various parts of the country, including even where you come from, Mr. Speaker. So I really want to support this, and I think this is a motion that we need to approve it as quickly as possible, Mr. Speaker, so that then we move, so that we have our matters, we have more time to deal with the matters before the House. I support, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kajwang Moses.
Mr. Speaker, this is a procedural motion. And the best practice for procedural motions usually is for the leader of majority to move and get a member of the other side to second. Because I believe that this is a matter that was discussed in the Senate Business Committee. It is a matter that ideally should not be contentious. I know we have been consulting here on whether Standing Order 32 and Standing Order 34 have been violated by this move. And I know that my colleagues will be prosecuting that matter. But in a Senate where we have spent more time fighting than finding common ground, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage the majority leader that on such procedural matters that we can have some bipartisanship so that you can have both sides speaking to it. Mr. Speaker, the debate that prompted this amendment to the Senate calendar was rancorous and was contentious. We had our say, the majority had their way. And what we said about the intent of getting cabinet secretaries to this House, Mr. Speaker, has gone on record. It is in the Hansard, and I don't think this is a motion for us to speak to the issues that we already prosecuted while debating the report of the Rules and Procedure Committee. Mr. Speaker, this is quite unavoidable, since last week that resolution was some impact on some of the busy committees, especially committees that have scheduled their activities and meetings into the next quarter. And some of those are like the Public Accounts Committee that I chair, the Public Investments Committee, which has a fairly busy schedule. And so, Mr. Speaker, from time to time, we might be seeking the leave of the Speaker to have meetings even when the grilling of cabinet secretaries is going on. Mr. Speaker, last week, I saw something very interesting. The former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, was called before the Rules Committee of the House of Commons. And the Speaker, in a session that lasted 3 hours and 45 minutes, the former Prime Minister, a man who was extremely powerful, a man who was extremely pompous, was reduced to the level of a witness before a committee. And the interesting thing is that being a parliamentary system, the former Prime Minister was appearing before a committee of his peers in the Conservative Party and his other peers from Labour Party. We should know and we should institutionalize that being in a special animal in this country. Mr. Speaker, we should encourage those people who have had the good favor and the privilege of serving this country in the executive. Yes, they've got access to resources, they've got access to decisions that can enrich, decisions that can impoverish, decisions that can change people's lives. They must remember that those functions that they exercise on behalf of the people of Kenya. And Mr. Speaker, every time we talk about the people of Kenya, we refer to Article 1 of the Constitution. And many a times I've heard people say that that right has been given to me by the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, there are countries without constitutions. The right is not given by the Constitution, the right is given by God. The Constitution is a mere record of that right, and the social contract between the led and the leaders. Mr. Speaker, when the cabinet secretaries come to this house, I said it last week, that perhaps they will regret why they came here. Mr. Speaker, I've sat with many members across the divide when interrogating financial accounts from governors. And so, Speaker, when the executive is on the other side, what I've seen is excellent bipartisanship. I want to encourage everyone in this house, when a cabinet secretary comes here, do not look at him as Kenya Kwanza, do not look at him as a man from your tribe, do not look at him as a friend of yours. Let the Senate be the Senate. And that is why in the editorial of yesterday's newspapers, Mr. Speaker, if you saw the editorial cartoon, parliamentary oversight was depicted as a corpse lying on a slab with many daggers on its back. Mr. Speaker, that tells you the mood of the public as far as the role of this parliament is concerned. Let us use this opportunity for us to rise above parochial and partisan interests. Let us use this opportunity to convince the nation that legislative oversight that was depicted as lying comatose on a slab has been reviewed. Fewer, we are able to make more meaningful questions, we are able to guide conversation, we are able to put the executive to task. Mr. Speaker, there have been many ways, avenues for policy positions to come to this house. Just last week, we approved the budget policy statement. Every year, the president is required to come to parliament to make an exposition of public policy. And Mr. Speaker, the motion that follows a presidential address is that the Senate to register its thanks to the president for exposition of public policy contained in the presidential address. There has been no shortage of opportunities for public policy to be brought here. We are going to use this chamber, that is assuming no one goes to court and invalidates what we did last week. We are going to use this chamber. So, Speaker, I'm not trying to threaten anybody, but it's going to be a torture chamber who have the habit of misusing the instruments of power that they wield. It will be an accountability chamber for those who think that they can hide in their ivory towers and run away from the public. It will be an accountability chamber for those who think that for a senator to see them, they must make an appointment 3 days or 4 days, and then they go there and they're kept waiting for 6 hours. We will meet here, Mr. Speaker, and we will ensure that we squeeze out of them the accountability that Kenyans expect, and we shall ensure that we are not going to have a rogue government that will be running this country from ivory towers, will be running this country from the executive, and some of them, Mr. Speaker, as you know, are people we competed against in the last elections. You work very hard to become a member of the Senate, the person you vanquished, and then they are the ones who are lording it over you. You work very hard to become the senator for Meru, and then the person you vanquished becomes a CAS, Mr. Speaker. And then when it comes to order of precedence, the CAS who defeated him in the last elections. These are things we must fix, Mr. Speaker. And I want to encourage Senator Dr. Boni Khalwale. In the past parliament, he came up with an order of precedence bill. We must revive that order of precedence so that those people who are political losers out there, and they are still Kenyans, they can get other opportunities, but they cannot lord it over the people who have been selected by the public to represent them here. Mr. Speaker, my final concern, that this House must and can only admit a cabinet secretary who is appointed as per the Constitution and who has been vetted by the National Assembly as required by the Constitution. Let nobody bend the rules to bring in chief administrative secretaries and all sorts of characters to this House. Mr. Speaker, I am supporting this motion on the assumption that the Senate Business Committee has discussed, and there has been unanimity on the matter. On that basis, I support.
Thank you, Senator Kajwang. Kiri, Idali.
Thank you once again, Honorable Speaker. I want to support the majority leader in the context of the amendment of this House standing orders, not standing orders, but calendar, sorry, so that we facilitate the appearances of the cabinet secretaries on Wednesday morning
in the sitting so that they answer to questions which honorable members have put forward regarding their respective ministries. I have listened through and contribution by the Honorable Senator Kajwang, and I want to confirm to him that indeed the House Business Committee sat, debated on the issues, the pros and cons, and the reasons which were put forward as to why we need these cabinet secretaries to appear before this House. I am alive to the fact that this House also debated in the course of the motion to amend the standing orders. It was acrimonious, but at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, this House is mandated to make sure that the people who've been given mandate as cabinet secretaries are responsible for what happens in their ministries. That responsibility, Honorable Speaker, can only be achieved when the said cabinet secretaries are called upon by the House to appear and respond substantively to the questions with which the honorable senators have asked. And these questions, Mr. Speaker, I am aware, are questions by those cabinet secretaries in their ministries on the roles which Kenyans expect them to do. Mr. Speaker, I am equally aware that there is an issue that was raised as regards the appearances by the cabinet secretaries in the House being non-members to this House. And I want to convince the members that that conversation, Mr. Speaker, was in the context of a misunderstanding of the persons who will be expected to appear before this House. And